Nope.
Hello, dear listener. I figured since Cinco de Mayo is this Friday, why not have a video centered around the exotic and beautiful country of Mexico? So sit back, relax, and pour yourself another shot of tequila. And if you enjoy these stories, be sure to let me know in the comments and to destroy that like button down below. Without any further ado, vamos a empezar. Número 1. This happened to my father when I was a young girl in the early or mid-90s. My dad was in pretty good shape, about 5'10", and in his mid-40s. He had a fairly high-up government job that frequently took him to Mexico. This particular trip had him working in Mexico City. One night, he and a coworker went out to dinner in a kind of touristy area I think was called Zona Rosa. They went to a few bars after dinner, enjoying the city, and decided to take a cab back to their hotel. So, they were in the taxi when it stopped at a red light. There was a police car waiting in line behind them. Suddenly, 2 men from the street ran up to their taxi, and the driver let them in. They attacked my dad and his friend, demanding their money and jewelry. Now, my dad was pretty strong, so when he started kicking the men, it probably did some damage. That's when the men started stabbing him with the rusty screwdriver they had as a weapon. His pants were tattered and bloody from the stab wounds. Meanwhile, the police behind them, who had a very clear view of everything, did absolutely nothing, and the taxi speeds off with everybody still inside. The attackers ended up taking both of their wallets, watches, and wedding rings. Now, the men are angry because there isn't much cash. They drive around the city, hitting my dad and his coworker over and over again, demanding the PIN numbers for their credit cards. My dad's coworker, who spoke Spanish, kept trying to tell them that they didn't have PIN numbers, but this just made them angrier. They had no idea what these men had planned for them as they drove them down and around the city. Finally, they stopped in an unfamiliar area next to an 18-wheeler. The men dragged out my father and his friend and told them that they had to crawl all the way underneath the truck. Then both men jumped in the taxi and finally sped away, leaving my dad and his friend stranded in a sketchy part of town with no money. Eventually, they got yet another taxi and went back to the hotel. My dad immediately packed his things and took the next flight home. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, looking at him. He was so pale and disheveled. I'd never seen him like that before. His wounds weren't too serious, but he did need a tetanus shot and ended up going to counseling. Despite what happened, my dad didn't let this experience scare him away from going back to Mexico City. He was very brave and continued to travel there for work until his retirement. He always said this could have happened to anyone in any city, but it's still one of the scariest things that has ever happened to my family. Número 2. I'm very familiar with the whereabouts of Mexico. Ever since I was a baby, my family have been going to Mexico so many times there for special family gatherings or other festive occasions. Up to this point, I've been to Mexico 7 times. From visiting Cabo San Lucas when I was a toddler, to recently going to Cancun to recognize my mom's cousin. All these moments were exciting and new to me every time. But as much as I love my country of ancestry, not everything is sunshine and rainbows in Mexico. There's the constant violence between cartels and corrupt police, and government scandals being picked off left and right. I've always had a massive fear of the drug cartels, especially Los Zetas. I would always hear stories of beheadings and other disgusting stuff that they would do constantly to make people afraid of them. From my experiences, the safest way to get into Mexico is always by airplane. But when I was younger, we would go there by road from Fresno to whatever destination we were headed to. And this road trip makes me feel sick even today. It was December of 2006. My dad was planning a family trip for us to go to his home state of Colima to spend a whole month there with his mom and dad. At the time, we didn't have enough money to go there by airplane because it was too expensive to bring our entire family. Colima is a small state on the central west coast of the Pacific in Mexico. It's possibly one of the quietest and safest states in the country you can visit. My parents said that we would be leaving and going by car. Back then, I was thrilled since I was an eager little boy, but now when I look back on it, my head screams out, "Oh no." We left from California the way to the border city of Nogales, across from Arizona. Ever since we crossed the border, Mom and Dad would always be scoping the roads for any sketchy thugs. In my childish mind, that behavior was puzzling because I didn't think anything that bad could happen on the road. But that day is when shit hit the fan. It had been almost 4 days of us driving on the federal highway, and we are in the desert in the state of Sinaloa. This highway has a notorious rep for many muggings and disappearances. That area was controlled by the infamous Sinaloa Federation cartel. And to those of you who don't know, that's the drug cartel that belonged to El Chapo Guzman. I've heard so many terrifying stories of his cartel's killings that scared me as a child. The hangings, the muggings, the beheadings. Don't get me started on that. We were driving our SUV really fast on this stretch of road with 2 cars of my dad's closest relatives and friends giving us company, while we were on the road for so long. Our speed was at about 95 miles per hour because on the highways, cartel thugs or members would be on the side of the highways waiting for people going slow. If you were a slow driver, chances are you'd become a victim. And if you were wondering, what about the cops? Well, here's a little answer for you. The police in Mexico are almost non-existent on lonely highways such as these, and they almost never consider looking for people who go missing. Not to mention, they get bribed by the cartel to search for anyone who they killed. That's how crooked the cops are there. So, as my dad is driving fast, I start to feel nauseous by the speed we were driving. I was in the very back seat until we saw a truck along the highway up ahead. It was a gray Honda Ridgeline with almost tinted windows just standing there in the dusk of the desert. My mom started to become worried, and as we nearly passed it, we could see a group of 6 men inside the truck. At that, we all began to brace ourselves for the worst. I saw the silhouette of an assault rifle being held in one of their hands. We automatically knew it was a cartel truck. My mom screamed at my dad to floor it as the truck started to gain on us. She told me to get my little baby brother with me and duck under the car windows. I cried hysterically as the car's engine rung in my ears. I saw the truck was still behind us, and I began to panic, thinking that it would ram us or start to shoot at us. The truck got so close that I thought that was the end for us. But suddenly, it gave up and began to slow down as we left the desert behind us. We finally reached the state of Jalisco, where we found a small quiet town by the coast. We stayed at a safe little cozy inn. I hugged my mom, crying as she kissed me, and said that the truck is gone and there was nothing to be afraid of anymore. I eventually stopped crying and went to bed. That's my scary brush with the cartel, and to anyone who is wishing to go to Mexico for whatever reasons, please, just go by airplane. You don't want to experience any danger in the loneliness of the road. Número 3. My coworker is a Mexican American, born and raised in Houston. His mom and dad, of course, were born in Mexico, and they entered the US before he was born, so most of his family still lives in Mexico. As a kid, every summer he would visit Mexico to spend a summer vacation with his cousins and other relatives. Well, this one summer, he and 3 of his cousins were playing alone along the mountainside, running up and down, racing each other, and having just a good time. He was 10 at the time, and the other boys were between the ages of 6 and 9. He was leading the pack in one of their races, when suddenly he heard one of his cousins scream, "Stop!" He figured he was just going too fast for them, and they were trying to catch up, so he kept running until that same cousin screamed, "La bruja!" For those of you who don't know, La bruja means witch in Spanish. Everybody looks up to where he was pointing, only to see a woman to their left, just standing there, looking down towards them. The cousin that first spotted her was transfixed on this woman, and his cousins were urging and begging him to stop looking at her, but of course he couldn't look away. He watched as the woman did some weird things with her index finger, rubbing them together along with other odd movements. That's when she began to beckon him closer to her. Thankfully, the other cousin snapped him out of his trance, and they all booked it down the hill. That night, the cousin who spotted the bruja woke up from a dream of the lady they saw on the mountain scratching him on his back. After waking up, they all found deep red marks in his skin going down his spine and the upper part of his back. The parents tried to justify it, saying he must have scratched himself in his sleep, but my friend assures me there is no way that could have happened. His cousin insists that even to this day, in the middle of the night, he can sometimes feel her touch. And if that wasn't creepy enough, he also says that there were times where he felt her touch while laying next to his wife in bed. He would roll over to find that it was his wife scratching him this time, and even in her deep sleep would have the creepiest smile on her face. Número 4. The following is the personal kidnapping account of my grandmother Rosie and her brother Armando. Just as a quick setting, this took place in La Petica, which is a rural little area just south of Monterrey in Mexico. From here on out, I will tell the story as close to per word as my grandmother would tell me and my brother, to keep it as authentic as possible, translated from Spanish. When I was a little girl, we always had legends of the witches in the wild. Don't go out alone. Don't stay out so late. If you do, las brujas will come and take you away. That's what my mother would tell Armando and me every day. She wouldn't let me or Armando go anywhere unless it was the both of us, and the furthest we could go was one little store only a mile away to get groceries. We were not well off with money, so we had to walk everywhere. When Armando and I got done working on the fields, Mama would let us play until it was night. Sometimes we would play tag with our friends. Sometimes Papa would chase us around or take us exploring in the woods. The exploring was fun because we got to see animals, but we would also see the little huts where las brujas lived. Everyone called them las brujas because they were weird and would constantly try to do black magic and talk to themselves. One day, Armando and I were playing alone because Papa was tired from working on the field all day and Mama had to make supper. We went to the woods and started to explore, but we went too deep and got lost. I cried and cried because I wanted Mama, but nobody heard us, so we kept walking around. After a little bit of time, an old lady heard us and said she would help. "No, you're a bruja and you're going to take us away," yelled Armando.
No, mijo. I know where your mommy and papi are,
she said. I cried more and told Armando that I wanted to go home. So he gave up and allowed the old lady to help us.
Okay, follow me.
After a while, she took us to a house that we weren't familiar with, but said that Mama and Papa were inside, so without thinking, we went inside. That was when the lady grabbed us, and as we screamed, began to carry us to another room. She threw us inside and locked the door. Armando kept banging on it, yelling at the lady to let us go, while I just sat there and cried. Even though it was quiet, I could still hear her repeating the same prayer over and over again in Spanish.
Glory to God that you have given me the blood of two innocents, which I could use to exact revenge against those who have wronged me in the past.
I wasn't sure how long we were trapped in that room, but I do remember lying on the ground because I was so tired from crying so long. According to Papa, we were not home, so he went around town looking for us until he came around the woods to look. He said he stopped at the house we were trapped in because, quote, something, maybe God, told him to look there. When Papa called out to the house, the bruja kept yelling at him to go away, but he said he thought he heard Armando, so he broke inside and looked around for himself. That was where he heard Armando's banging and, thankfully, found us. When he did, he gave us a big hug and began to take us away, but not before warning the bruja that if he was to ever even see her again, he would kill her. Mama was crying so hard when we made it back home that it made me begin to cry too. Papa yelled at us for being dumb and going out so far, and Armando just looked at the floor. After that, Mama did not let us go out anymore without her or Papa with us until we were teenagers. Every day I thank God for not letting me and Armando not get into more danger that day. I do not know what the Bruja wanted with us, but I'm glad we weren't able to find out. Número 5. I'm second generation American. Both sets of my grandparents moved here from Mexico when they were young adults. My younger sister and I had a fairly typical upbringing, which consisted of plenty of folklore to scare us disobedient children into misbehaving. La Lloranja scared me the most. It was the story of a weeping woman who wandered around late at night searching for her children. Random children who went out too late and were found by her were promptly drowned. My little sister, on the other hand, was certain that the Cocoy, the Mexican equivalent of the boogeyman, lived in our basement, and she refused to go there. Amongst us and the other neighborhood kids, the most common legend was of the woman who lived on the corner. Already somewhat of a shabby neighborhood, her house was almost completely covered in overgrown weeds and had a peeling newspaper covering up the windows. Us kids said that she was a bruja, a witch. A popular pastime was to choose one kid to suck up enough courage, have them run up to her door, bang on it while screaming bruja, and then run away. She would run outside, her gray and black hair flying, and scream curses at us. After a while, the bruja game ended because she started scaring us more badly than we could ever scare her. She took to roaming the streets, screaming obscenities, death threats, and various nonsense about demons. Whatever game was being played in the street was promptly abandoned when she came around. The adults told us to stay away because they were certain that she was off her medication or something. Police were called and promptly told us that we couldn't do anything unless she actually became violent. One night, I woke up in the bed that I shared with my sister because I had to pee. It was an unusually warm summer night, and the nightgown I was wearing was sticking to my legs. So, before going to the bathroom, I foolishly opened the door that led to our patio. I was planning to stand there for a few minutes and cool off while, I don't know, listening to the leaves below or whatever my 8-year-old mind was thinking of. That's when I heard a rustling in the bushes that made my body turn cold. My first thought was that it was La Lloranja and that she had finally found me, and that this was my punishment for not cleaning up my dinner like I had been asked to. No, it was the bruja, with a strange-looking lump covered by a towel under her belt. Out she came from the bushes, and in 1, 2, 3 steps, she was over to me, grabbing my wrist and pulling. She started walking, and I, shocked into compliance, let her pull me along. She was muttering under her breath. I remember feeling a warm trickle down my leg as my bladder let go. It wasn't until we were about 10 feet to the backyard gate that I realized my exact situation and began screaming. And when I did, she let go of my wrist and ran. Simple as that. The investigation that inevitably followed turned up one thing. The towel under her belt. It contained a sharp fillet knife. After that incident, the police took her away, and none of us in the neighborhood ever saw her again. Gracias for listening. Forgive me for any failed attempts at translating Spanish, and subscribe if you haven't done so already for future videos. Until next time, dear listener, stay safe out there. I'll be seeing you in the next video.